Good morning, or good afternoon, wherever you are. Welcome to day 6 of the Fertile Mind Summit. This is the second last day. I am here with the beautiful Dr. Morgan Francis. She is a professional counsellor, and you also have a doctorate degree in clinical psychology. She specialises in the treatment of body image, so many things. So I'm going to read it. Treatment of body image, sexual health, mood disorders, relationships, self-empowerment, and eating disorders, and couples therapy, which I cannot wait to talk to you about. So thank you so much for joining us. I feel really honoured. To begin with, would you like to just tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got to be where you are today?
Yes. Well, first of all, thank you for having me on here. It is just such an honor to be a part of this summit. And I'm really excited to dive into all the topics related to mental health and body image and infertility and couples. So I know that this is going to be a very important conversation that we have today. And I'm located in Scottsdale, Arizona. I am the founder and owner of Scottsdale Premier Counseling, which is a private practice. And I do, like you said, specialize in all those things. And then I work with individual therapy, group therapy, family, and couples. And I just feel it's just such an honor for me to be able to be a part of everyone's healing process.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And it's such an important thing. Do you feel like therapy has become a little bit more less, a stigma around it, that people are actually reaching out and asking for help a little bit more these days? Because asking for help is such a hard thing.
Yeah, it's very unnatural for us to ask for help, which is so backwards, right? I mean, if we are physically hurt, we're going to call out and ask for someone to help us. But when it comes to our mental and emotional wounds, we tend to keep everything very contained and secretive. So yes, I am seeing a shift. I kind of joke around, that I have job security, meaning that, there's always going to be a need for mental health, because with everything shifting and changing so drastically in our times, people really do need that additional support. So I am seeing younger clients and also men in general be much more willing to come into therapy.
Okay, great. Yeah. And in terms of therapy, why is it so important that we talk about things, that we process our feelings, that we feel the emotions? Why is that there's such an emphasis, and why is it so important?
Well, because connection is the essence of our existence. And in order for us to connect and be able to talk about things, we have to be able to understand how shame plays such a critical role in our relationship, not only to ourselves, but to others. So shame lives in that petri dish of silence and secrecy and judgment. And so we know through Brene Brown's research and many other people that have studied shame that it's so important for us to take that emotional risk and really ultimately have uncertainty and work with being able to connect with others and work on our vulnerability. And it can feel incredibly vulnerable to open up to a complete stranger. So what I try to do, especially in the first session, is just really comfort and help the person not feel so overwhelmed when they're starting to unpack their story.
And that's the thing, it's unpacking it, isn't it? Because it's not just one thing. It's a whole lifetime of things that we bury down. And I know exactly on my fertility journey, and I know all of the women who are watching on their fertility journey as well, we get to this point where I think infertility shines a light on a lot of the stuff that's kind of going on underneath. This is the thing that kind of brings it up to the surface. And we're always so scared to bring it up and take that lid off, because, as you said, we have to unpack so much stuff. There's so much stuff that we have to do. So I know that you deal with ladies who are suffering from infertility. So what are some of the things that you tell them? What are some of the things that they come in to seek your help for?
Oh, goodness. Well, there's a whole host of emotions that a person who is experiencing infertility can be going through. And, there's obviously sadness, but there's also anger. There's also confusion. And just this loss of identity, because so much of a woman's identity is enmeshed with becoming a mother. So if we're unable to become a mother, or we're struggling achieving pregnancy, then that is a rupture to who we are and our identity. So often they're struggling with a low self-concept, and that self-concept then goes into other parts of their life. So their relationship with their partners, their morals, their values, their relationships with others, and also could be like even if they're in their career, and obviously specifically with their body image as well.
Mm-hmm. And at what point in their journey do they normally come to see you? Is it in the middle? Is it at the end? Because this journey, once you get on it, and I know from personal experience, even when you get off it, like it just doesn't go away. It's something that, and especially if you don't talk about it.
Yeah, I don't have. I've seen them in all different types of timeline of the journey. I don't have a consistent one where they're more in the beginning versus the end. I mean, I've kind of seen them all at different stages.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't have a specific stage. They're just at a point where they may have exhausted all other options, and they can't handle it anymore. Or there's another rupture. Let's say there's a marital dispute, or their sexual intimacy is really non-existent, or there's, it's just been like a really difficult thing for them to go through. And so it might be that brings them in. And then I'll find out that they've been doing a lot of, infertility procedures, or they've had this whole journey trying to get pregnant. And that is like you said a moment ago, like the underlying virus, or like the underlying problem that's going on for them. And so that's what we have to really address.
Yeah. And I'd love to dive down a little bit more on sex as well, because that is, I mean, obviously when we're on our fertility journey, it's all about the sex. And I know that on mine, like my sex life it really ruined it for quite a number of years while I was on it, because it becomes this timed thing. The romance goes out of it, the connection goes out of it. It becomes this obligation, instead of you forget that we can have sex for fun. So
right.
How do you dig into that? What's the advice that you would give to the ladies who are watching?
Well, it's an interesting piece, because the piece that I actually have had the most, not the most, but a lot of experience with, was working with the men who were acting out. So meaning they were seeking maybe other partners, or there was also infidelity due to that time, because the relationship, the sexual intimacy was very much compromised, because like you said, there was no joy. There was a lack of pleasure. It was scheduled. There's like a science to it that they have to follow. And there's all these, there's parameters, instead of just being, spontaneous or pleasurable and fun. It became more like we're only having sex to become pregnant. And so I was actually working first and foremost a lot with the men around it, and helping them to become much more sensitive and work on their empathy towards their wife and or partner. And then I would have the wife come in, and I mean, she was just, most of the time, she's just crushed. I mean, she's like there's so many traumas to her, the trauma of not being able to get pregnant, now the trauma of her husband acting outside of the relationship. And so really giving her a lot of support and helping her. Sorry, my allergies are acting up right now, so I gotta scratch my nose. And really helping her to feel that support, and then repairing their the trust that was broken, and helping them to rebuild their marriage. And so that's oftentimes what my work focused on was helping them repair their marriage.
Yeah. And so for the woman that, you know, so it hasn't gone that far, but you know, we can tell that it's just not there. I mean, we can tell it in ourselves anyway, that there's just no joy in it. So what are there some steps, or are there some things that they can do to rekindle, to try to, you know, put fertility over here, and then, you know, sex for pregnancy over here, and something over there? Is that how they do it, or is it just an all-encompassing changing mindset?
Yeah, I think it's, you know, so much of it goes right to sexual intercourse. And so they tend to forget about, you know, foreplay, and sexual intimacy is a spectrum. So there's so many things along the spectrum, and maybe it's just the initial of physical touch, like holding each other's hands, hugging, kissing, you know, things that may not always lead to intercourse. And so it's not forgetting those softer but very important gestures that go into our sexual intimacy, and not only just assuming that sexual intimacy means sexual intercourse.
Of course, yeah, because you know yourself, if you are like, I love holding hands with my partner, it makes me feel really connected, and those are the things. And foreplay is the big thing, because I think that we're so focused on, right, I'm ovulating right now, we need to do this right now, rather than, well, you're not going to ovulate just in a minute. Like, it's this thing that we can absolutely prolong and make it something that it's, you know, actually enjoyable.
Right. And it's removing the pressure of the time, like the time, and getting back to the connection. Because as much as society wants us to think that men are not emotional, or, you know, don't know how to connect, they really do. And many of the men that I've worked with miss that. They miss the connection with their partner, and they want that to be another, you know, a part of their sexual intimacy, and then that part got lost. So it's about rebuilding not only their sexual intimacy, but also their emotional intimacy.
And you're right, we do forget about that, because I remember on my journey, and I'm going to say this because my husband isn't part of this group, hopefully he won't see it, but when, like, it was so much pressure that he actually couldn't perform. And so that was then it was just this skyball thing, and it left me frustrated. He was frustrated, and then feeling that he couldn't perform as well. And it was just this unspoken thing, because we didn't speak about it either, because it's embarrassing. It's embarrassing for me because he doesn't find me desirable enough to, you know, to finish. And for him, well, it's just such a sensitive thing for a male as well.
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought that up, because erectile dysfunction is huge when I work with men around this topic. And I love what you said, like, as women, we tend to personalize it and think it's about us, and it's not about us. It's really not. It's about the connection and the pressure that they are putting on themselves. So it's helping the man, like, take on all this pressure, because for men, their identity is really in alignment with, I have to fix it, I have to make it better, I have to rescue her. And the man can feel less masculine when he's unable to fix the issue, because he blames himself too. And so all these things are happening simultaneously, very quickly in a bedroom. And so it's really important to explore these areas and try to unpack and unpeel back the layers, so that we can see this is not just a one-dimensional issue. There's many issues playing here as to why the sexual intimacy is being ruptured. And so that's part of the couples work, is being able to have more connection and taking off this pressure, not only for the woman and also for the man.
Yeah, and it's, I love that you pointed out that it's the, like, their feeling as well. So they're emotionally attached to this, because my view was always, well, a man's just going to be happy if he's just getting some, you know, like that was my very naive at the very beginning view of it, that it just wouldn't matter in what conditions, as long as he's getting it, then it's fine. But it has really opened my eyes to know it's actually a little bit more than that, and
and
simplifying them into
exactly. And that's where the culture really has done such a disservice to men's sexual intimacy, because it's not that that's not some level of truth there. They are happy to be able to be sexually active with a woman that they care about and love, but there's also society misses out on the connection piece. They think it's only all just physical, and it's not. And it's not like, it's just not all emotional for women either. Women are very physical beings as well, and allowing themselves to enjoy sexual pleasure and allow themselves to be able to just, again, find themselves. So I think it's just a fascinating area to explore. And again, I'm very honored that I get to be to help people and get to be a part of their journey.
And so when they're at that point, they're frustrated, they're both kind of retreating to their corners. What are some of the steps that they can do? Is it just having a conversation? Like, what would you recommend that they do to try to go from just the woman being hurt, the man being frustrated? You know, how do they rebuild that?
Well, it's a great question. So the first and foremost is that they got to come in. There's got to be a willingness to talk about it. And if they can't figure a solution out between the two of them, then that's where working with a licensed mental health professional is going to be really important. And sometimes that recommendation can come best from a person's OBGYN, because it may not always be well received if it's from, the wife. And so sometimes it's better to hear it from another medical professional who says, hey, we have this infertility specialist that's in our clinic. I think it'd be really helpful. And then whether he or she can help you, they can then maybe refer you to another, person who specializes in sexual health and sexual intimacy. So once they're in, then it's about working on unpacking the stressor. So working with, what the husband's experience is, what the wife's experience is. They may also need their own individual therapist outside of their couples therapist. Because sometimes that happens for me. Like, I'll have a couple come in and I say, okay, well, I can work with you, but I also need you to do your own work. I need you to work through your anger about not being able to get pregnant. I need you to work on your body image, about, everything that's going on for you. And then, for the man, he may not be comfortable talking about erectile dysfunction right away. So he may be feeling safer to handle that first in an individual session, and then come back in and talk about what's been going on between the two of them. And then it's just about, again, like finding that intimacy, rebuilding it. So first, I always say, just work on physical touch, start there, and work on, date nights, because so many times we get an autopilot and we lose just having fun and finding that pleasure and that spontaneity through date nights. And that doesn't mean like going to a movie, because you're not talking. So, going to do something that's an activity that two of you can do together. And knowing that you're not alone. I mean, there's so many couples that struggle with this. And I think that's also a big piece. A lot of, individuals think it's just them. They're the only person that is experiencing this. And that's the furthest thing from the truth.
And one of the things that I didn't realize was that, and I know it sounds really silly when I say it out loud now, but infertility actually affects the man as well. And so there's so much support out there for women who are going through it, and all of the focus is on supporting the woman. But the man kind of gets left at the end. And it's not until, it wasn't until afterwards. And now I'm having conversations with my husband about it. And he was like, yeah, it really affected me. And there's things that are coming up in his life now that are delayed trauma from our infertility.
Yeah.
Whereas it's acceptable for me to go through. But I never considered him. And it's embarrassing to admit. I never considered him, because I was so hell-bent on supporting myself. And we actually went through and had a surrogate as well. So my sister-in-law had a baby for us. So there were 3 of us in the relationship, I guess.
Yeah.
So that would have been interesting for you to give us a little bit of therapy, because we probably needed it. Because what we did was we retreated to our corners. We just needed to support ourselves in the best way that we could. So we weren't actually talking about it together. So when there are 3 in the relationship, you know, even 2 or 3, how would you what would you suggest that they do so that they keep the lines of communication open despite feeling like they're falling apart themselves?
Yeah, well, you bring up a really good point, because when we're going through a traumatic experience or we've endured trauma, that's what we tend to do. We retract, we pull away, and we isolate ourselves. We go into our shell like a turtle, and we don't talk about it. And what we have to do in order to heal trauma is really implement. So trauma is healed through implementation and or movement. So movement is communication. So communicating and talking and coming together, that's actually where the healing begins. Being able just to all 3 of you get together, and be, you know, have those open lines of what's going on for each one of us and how it's affecting all of us. And again, that's really sophisticated. You know, most people don't think to do that because it feels very unnatural. And you're right, it is unnatural to do the opposite of what your normal typical traumatic response says to do. Your traumatic response says, well, I'm going to avoid having these conversations. This is all on me. This is my body. I'm the one who's going through it. He can't possibly understand. And on some level, sure, it is your body. He may not understand everything, and this is happening to you, and it's happening to others as well that are in your world. So everyone's experiencing this level of trauma on some level, and it doesn't mean that, you know, one person's is more than the other, because you all affect each other. So when it comes to a family dynamic, you know, it's I've seen where let's say it's a third pregnancy, like the woman was able to get pregnant the first 2 times, but she wasn't able to get pregnant like the 3rd time, and she really wants to get pregnant with her 3rd child. Then it also can affect the other 2 children, because the mom's going through her own disturbances with her mood and her energy, and maybe she's just tired, you know, so she's not able to be as attentive to her other children. So there's lots of different factors that go into key when we're looking at the family dynamic. And it's really, again, important to work on helping them to communicate with one another.
Yeah, and I think what you touched on there, I think a lot of it is awareness as well. So a lot of the times we're just not aware that we're doing it because it's just such a habit that we've done. And I know for Renee, who was our surrogate, like she had 2 boys as well. And just I never considered that. So I think we just need to be aware of other people's feelings as well, not responsible for them, but aware of them.
Yeah.
And I read this quote that you had on your website, and it really, really connected with me. And you said, there is no healing without pain. In order to heal, you must feel it. And that's tough. But I am absolutely 100% learning, and this is what I coach my clients on as well, because they're going through miscarriages and things like that. It's so important to just feel it in that moment, because the pain just does not go away.
Yeah, and I tell my clients too, like, pain is inevitable, suffering is not.
Yes, I love that.
And we tend to suffer, obviously, but we really want to move into pain, because the suffering will automatically will just kill us, and the pain, we can tolerate that. And then there's obviously the whole grieving process, all the loss that comes in with everything, and it can be so difficult. I mean, I've seen it with miscarriages as well, and it's very painful for so many, not only women but couples.
Yeah, absolutely. And so do you have any suggestions in terms of dealing with the pain? Like, are there steps? Are there things that they can do? Or is it just something that you just have to sit in? Is there a time limit?
No, there's no time limit. And I think that's the hardest piece, right? Because in my world, from a diagnostic perspective, everything is kind of put with time. So for like depression, there's 2 weeks. With hypomania, there's 4 days. So there's criterion for time. And when it comes to grief and loss, there's no parameter, there's no time criterion. So, you know, grieving can, I mean, it just can affect you in so many multiple layers and ways. And so there's no right way to grieve. There's no wrong way to grieve. And everyone's grieving process looks different. So I always recommend that they work with a grief and trauma specialist if there has been a loss involved, because, you know, let's just say one partner is still struggling a significant amount of time after, and the other partner is like, okay, I'm ready to try again. Like, let's get going. So you have 2 people on different, you know, time frames, and that can be a struggle as well. So it's really getting to a point where just because you decide to try again doesn't mean that you're not still hurting about the loss that you endured. Yeah. It's not an either or, it's an and. So I'm grieving and I'm trying to conceive again. And it doesn't take away from the fact that you lost, you know, a child. So that's a big distinction I try to help people understand.
And I think that's really important to note, because I think a lot of the times we, like, if we have a miscarriage, then we almost feel guilty for trying again, moving on, because we think that that's, you know, like we've moved on and we don't want to move on. So we sit there for so long in that grief and the pain and the suffering, because we almost get to that stage where we're just numb, and sometimes we just want to feel something. And so yes, I do find that sometimes, and I know with myself, you know, you just sit in that pain because the thought of moving on means, you know, in your mind that you've gotten over it, or that it didn't exist, or that it didn't mean anything, and that's really scary.
Yes, and it's quite the opposite. One of the biggest pieces is learning to open up your heart again. I mean, how that takes a tremendous amount of courage, because when we lose someone that means so much to us, we want to close our heart. We don't want to love again, because loving hurt us. And so for a person to be able to open up their heart again, I mean, it's so courageous and brave. And I think that that's a beautiful piece around grieving, is that our hearts can make room to love so many things, so many people. And just because it's opening up again doesn't mean that what you lost goes away. It's just making space to love some more.
And I think that's really important as well, making space, because we can hold on to so much stuff as well, that we're then, like, we can only store so much. And so we need to create that space and let a few things go in order to actually fill our life full of, you know, happiness and joy. And so you also deal with body image and things like that. And so that is a really big thing in fertility as well. Not so much how we look, like on the outside, but that is a factor as well, because obviously the hormones, we're bloated, you know, we feel like we can't exercise because it's a certain time of the month, and we're scared to, because, you know, we read somewhere that perhaps physical exercise might cause something. So we're kind of in this fight with our body. And if it's not performing the way that we feel like it should, then we go into this almost, we don't like our body anymore. So how do we deal with that? How do we learn to love our bodies again?
Oh, that's a big question.
Let me you can unpack that if you want.
So the individuals that I see with regards to body image and infertility, so for much of their life, their focus on their body has been to keep it thin, right? To keep it small and attractive. And they've been able to potentially do that through dieting, restricting, and exercising, some more extreme ways than others. And then when they're trying to get pregnant and they're going through their struggles, I've seen a couple of things happen. I've seen some women not even like, oh my gosh, like I can't even like think about trying to restrict or diet right now, because that seems so meaningless compared to what I'm really trying to achieve, and that is to become a mom. So now the focus is off of the restricting and the diets and all the exercise, and it's now to, okay, now I'm hyper focused on all my, appointments and procedures and scheduled and everything I'm going through to try to get pregnant. And so it's this obsessive compulsiveness that shifts from how I look to what my body's able to actually do in relation to becoming a mom. And that's a big journey. I mean, that in of itself is a lot for someone to like, that roller coaster of a ride is really intense. So, I mean, there's so many different, ways to work through that. But again, helping them, supporting them, working with, their OBGYN, helping with their, fertility specialist, working with their partner, using different theoretical approaches. I mean, there's a lot to that, but it makes sense that for many women, especially if we look at different cultures, that our self-worth just really plummets, and we blame our bodies because as women, we are programmed to blame our bodies for everything. I mean, that's just that's society, that's diet culture, that's the patriarch, that's women's oppression. I mean, that falls into so many things. So when it comes to, for infertility, that's another thing that we blame ourselves about.
And is there a way to break that cycle? Like, I know that you have, and I'll mention it now, you are giving away a free online body image course as part of this. So ladies, if you are watching live, if you are just watching on the replay, if you make a comment, every time you comment on one of the videos, you'll get an entry into the draw to win some amazing prizes. And this is one of them. So do you delve into that with your body image course, like repairing the damage that we've done in the mindset?
I do. I don't go too much into the trauma part because so much of our trauma is very specific to ourselves. I do go into challenging your negative thoughts about your body, listening and responding, which is, I think, a big piece of our body image, because we tend to feel like we can control how our body's going to respond versus I'm going to respect and align and befriend my body instead of becoming an enemy or being very, just disgusted with my body for doing this to me. Like, my body's against me. Our bodies are never going to be against us. Our bodies are fighting with us. And that can be very hard to swallow when you keep having traumas, or you keep going and hearing the word no, or not this month. And because we can feel like our bodies are betraying us. And so that whole relationship, because it really is a relationship, is what I try to unpack in a therapeutic setting. The course goes into more of the etiology of our body image, looking at our self-esteem, our femininity, our masculinity, gender identity, our shame, and things like that, to help a person understand. And there's like a whole workbook that they can follow along in order to be able to maximize the most out of their body image journey.
I think that's so important. So if there was one piece of advice that you could give the lady who is on this journey now, she is suffocating, she's completely consumed by it, what's the one piece of advice that you would give her today?
Oh, advice. You're not alone, and you can't do it alone. You can't. And I think that's the biggest piece, is that we think that it's only us and we're the only person going through our situation. And what I have learned, and being in a position where I work with so many people, I mean, you're not alone. And to reach out, to get that support, whether it's from a friend, even maybe start there first if it doesn't feel comfortable or you're ready to go into therapy yet. But definitely there are resources that can be available to you to help you through your really traumatic time. I think that would be my main thing, is let them know they're not alone.
Yeah, yeah. And what is the one thing, like the one physical thing that they could do today to try to pull themselves out of where they're sitting right now?
Call a therapist, book an appointment with a therapist, someone who specializes in this area, so that you're maximizing, your time and financial investment. And I would say make that call. That would be the first step, is just get in the room. I think so many times it's so hard. And I would say get in the room and meet with somebody and start talking, because you need that support, so that you're not crazy. You're not, this is we've been there, and this is hard, and that you've got that support.
And I think that you touched on something there, like we think that we're crazy. Like we think that these thoughts that we're having make us a bad person, but they don't make us a bad person. They make us quite normal. And if we started talking about it more openly in a conversation, then we'd realize that, like anyone else on this journey, is actually having the same thoughts. But there are things that we can do about that.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
So how, outside of this summit, how can people get in contact with you? What kind of resources do you have on your website?
Yeah, so they're more than welcome to sign up for my email newsletter, and you can go onto my website, which is www.scottsdalepremiercounseling.com, and sign up for my email newsletter. And on my email newsletter, all my podcast interviews and summit interviews come out, so they'll definitely be able to listen to things I've talked about with regards to body image and mental health. I also give lots of tips and tools with regards to mental health and wellness. And then another area that they can find me on is on Instagram at Dr. Morgan Francis, and I give tons of information there, and that's also has the link tree with the signups and the enrollment into the body image course. And the body image course it's yours once you purchase it. You'll have it forever, and it's audio and video, and you get the workbook as well. So it's a lot of great information.
Perfect. And we're giving away one free copy. Yay! Thank you so much for coming on. You are a wealth of information. I love your experience. I love what you do. So thank you so much for taking the time and actually coming on and talking to us about infertility.
Oh, I love what you are doing. This is just such a beautiful, amazing event that you're putting together. And thank you so much. And I'm very honored to be a part of it. So thank you for having me here.
Thank you.